Welcome back to Connect and Transform. We're continuing looking at our text comparison tool that we're building for the web. You'll recall that in previous videos, we've exercised every single rule except for rules 8 and 9, which are in while loops 3 and 4. If I scroll down in the code here, this is while loops 3 and 4 that we've never seen run yet, and that's rule 8 and rule 9. So I've gone to the files and I've added some additional text, but more importantly, I added text that would not match anything else in either file, and I added more text to one file than the other, which means that on purpose, one of the files will have more of a tail than the other one. So I'm going to go over here to the browser and I'll refresh, reselect these files, and scroll all the way to the bottom. And you may not be able to see it. Even I can barely see it. I can see rule 7 here, and then rule 9, 9, and 9. So that ending tail is hitting rule 9. And if I refresh the page, no changes to the code. And if I just load the files in the opposite order and scroll to the bottom, then we see rule 8. Yeah, so 8, 8, 8, and 8 is picking up the very tail end of that file. So that vindicates this being in the code. We've now seen rules 8 and 9 being executed, so it was good that our plan included that. I just want to show one more thing in this quick video. I wanted to talk briefly about this, that I wasn't sure what to name it, but this lever, which gets used in rule 4. So rule 4 is the one that looks at substrings after all white space has been removed. And it's basically saying, let's look at the first n characters after removing all white space. And if those are equal, then we will apply rule 4. So right now we have this at a value of 6. So let's briefly scroll back up here in our browser. So rule 4 is the one that produces orange lines. So we see that it is correctly matching this GID equals graph because the first 6 non-white space characters do match. But then if we scroll down here, we see a lot of orange lines, and they're not correct. In particular, look at these 3 lines in red and these 3 lines here. Those are the same, and they should be matching, but they're not because these lines here have already been consumed by rule 4. So rule 4 is matching too eagerly. So we're going to increase that value so that the substring that we're looking at gets to be long enough that these are no longer seen as a match. Now what that's going to do is it's probably going to kick this one out of rule 4 because it'll make rule 4 less eager and less likely to occur. So there's a trade-off, and I'll have to address that in a future video, but I'm going to change that from 6 to 20 just for demonstration purposes. We'll refresh and reload our files. And yes, we now see that GID equals graph is no longer being no longer triggering rule 4. It should be triggering rule 4, but we've made rule 4 so reluctant to run that it's not triggering there anymore. But over here we see a lot less orange, and it is now better. So these 3 are now correctly identifying with these 3, and these 3 are correctly identifying as unidentifiable, unmatchable. So if we scroll through the whole file, there's a couple instances. Like this is another example. Graph ID equals graph should probably have matched this one, although it's reasonable, I guess, that it doesn't because it is significantly different. But there might be 2 or 3 other examples that would have matched rule 4 that no longer do. but I can tell that all of these are matching correctly. Okay, so here's an example that probably should match rule 4, but because this one has dot y-axis and this one doesn't, there is no contiguous substring long enough for rule 4 to match these. Now, alternatively, I might just want to keep rule 4 very lazy, and I might just want to add a new rule altogether to handle these couple of scenarios. So I'm not quite sure on that. And there might be, yeah, there's probably these 3 should have matched these 3, but I think beyond that, everything at the end of the file is behaving correctly. The other thing I want to note, the second thing that we'll need to work on fixing, which I mentioned in a previous video, we see this thrashing red to green to red to green to red to green to red. And so we do want to use that most recently applied rule variable in rule 7 and say that if rule 7 was the most recent rule to run, we're going to change the logic around how we insert elements and where we insert elements. So those are 2 things that we need to do. We either need to figure out a new way to adjust sensitivity on rule 4, or we need to add a additional rule to cover the shorter lines that rule 4 was previously handling. And then we need to handle the thrashing around rule 7. And I think once those 2 are addressed, it looks to me like the grouping and classification of the text matching will basically be done, and then we can just focus more on the user interface. So I just wanted to show that one lever, the variable, and then I also wanted to show that we could exercise rules 8 and 9, and that we did actually need while loops 3 and 4. Thanks for watching.